So we're chest deep in the Dream trilogy within the Nightmare saga, and we are going to do our very best to master the art of watching this movie and not being offended by the new version of Kristen Parker now that Patricia Arquette has exited the series. This that we talk about, of course, is A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master, the 1988 film directed by Mr. Renny Harlin. Let's talk about it. So the first thing we should really talk about is the absence of Patricia Arquette in this movie as Kristen Parker. Now, Patricia went on to become a big star, so she didn't feel the need to return to the franchise, and instead we got a fill-in who is named Tuesday Night, which immediately became my least favorite night of the week after I watched this movie. And if I refer to her as fake Kristen, you're just going to have to forgive me. Creepy quotes about sleep to begin one of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies are always welcome, and that's what we get here. We've got rock music playing over a little girl using sidewalk chalk, and we soon see she is drawing 1428 Elm Street. Little did I know that this rock song that I was enjoying this whole time was sung by Tuesday Night, who plays Fake Kristen. Then Fake Kristen shows up into the scene and inexplicably decides to walk right into Freddy's house. It's at this point in the movie that we are introduced to the fresh meat, more or less.
Oh, sweet, fresh meat.
Alice and Rick are the first two up now. Alice is sort of a daydreamer, kind of ugly duckling. She dresses like a 1920s librarian, real mild-mannered teenager, whereas Rick, her brother, is Fake Kristen's boyfriend, and he looks like he's dressed like Tom Cruise for Halloween. We also get Dan, who is the jock that Alice is smitten with. Deb and Sheila wind up rounding out the body count. And it's a strong cast. It's not bad. It's not what 3 was. I mean, 3 is probably an all-time high for this series. But they pull their weight, and they do a pretty good job. Now, I got to give a shout-out to Renny Harlin, because at the beginning of this movie, he gives us a classic 80s karate montage for no apparent reason. However, once it ends, that's when the murders start to happen. And unfortunately, we lose 2 of our Dream Warriors right off the bat. I did not have Kincaid's dog pissing fire and resurrecting Freddy Krueger in the middle of a junkyard on my bingo card. But if I had, I'd have done well for myself, because it's exactly how Freddy comes back to us. Creative deaths to start us off with this movie. Joey in the waterbed. I mean, I feared waterbeds up until like 2 weeks ago on account of this film. Losing who we lose at the beginning of this movie was tough for me to deal with as a kid, because I grew attached to them from part 3. Fake Kristen tries really hard here, but it still doesn't do it for me. I mean, we get to a point in the scene where she's distraught over the death of her 2 friends, and she knows it's her fault. Her mother feels like she just needs to get some rest, so her mother slips some sleeping pills into her drink. Kristen realizes what's going to happen, and Freddy is just sitting there waiting patiently, because his ultimate plan is for Kristen to bring him more teenagers into her nightmares and ultimately expose them to Freddy Krueger. Kristen does so. She makes another big boo-boo and brings Alice into her nightmare, and just like that, Alice is now infected by Freddy. Freddy's got a new outlet to more children. And the dream stalker is happy because he's still young. He's spry. He's not ready to retire just yet. But man, did Fake Kristen really shoot her powers into Alice in that dream? Once Fake Kristen winds up dying, it's traumatic for all the kids involved, but we're back to our new central cast. And Rick decides to drop a line on Dan, which is fantastic. He basically says, have you ever looked at our town's history? It's not exactly a safe place to be a teenager. I pop for that one. Now, the deaths in this movie are inventive. They always are, but they play perfectly off of all of these children's fears. For example, the young lady that has asthma has the breath sucked right out of her body by Freddy Krueger. The roach scene for the girl who was terrified of bugs was one of the nastiest and most inventive deaths in the franchise. Alice is terrified of staying in Springwood and just working at a diner her whole life. So Freddy exploits that. There's a great theater scene involving that where Freddy confronts her in the diner. We get the soul pizza scene where the meatballs on the pizza are all the faces of the friends that he's recently taken away from Alice. And from there, we get into a killer 1980s pump-up scene for Alice getting ready for the final battle with Freddy. You see her, she's arming herself with different pieces and parts from her friends that were taken away from her. The end of this movie was fantastic. The battle in the church was tremendous, and I can't help but notice how much better the endings to 3 and 4 were than the endings to 1 and 2 were. Now, 1 and 2 were still stellar films. 3 and 4 are good in their own right. They just nailed these endings so much better. There's really no comparison on it. This movie is killer. I was not happy about Patricia Arquette not being involved in it. Fake Kristen still bugs me to this day, in case you hadn't picked up on that. But it really set itself apart from Dream Warriors. And I don't think they could have done that if they kept the 3 holdover characters around for very long into the movie. It's a 7 out of 10. I mean, it ages gracefully. The Dream Master is a very cool watch. I remember going to the theater to see it when I was a kid. I want to say that's the earliest horror movie I remember going to the theater and watching. I thought the poster was cool. I think everything about this movie is cool. It probably would have been a 9 out of 10 if we'd had Patricia Arquette back, but I'll stop complaining about it at some point in my life, I'm sure. That's Aging Gracefully. I am Matthew Essex. I will see you on the other side.